Welcome to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rotocap with you on this Sunday morning, the 1st of March. And man, we have a lot to talk about. This morning, Indiana men's basketball got things done last night in Seattle. They took care of Washington. It was never close, and it's the kind of game that Indiana hasn't played on the road in the Big Ten in quite some time, but they handled business, taking down the Huskies 78-62. They will go to Eugene, Oregon now for a date with the Ducks on Tuesday night, and weird things happen late on Tuesday night in the Big Ten, so keep your eyes peeled for that one, 9 p.m. on March 4th. But Indiana is positioned well now, and it's the first time in a while that we've been able to say that Indiana men's basketball is positioned well in the Big Ten. They're back to 500 in league play, 9-9 in the Big Ten, 18-11 overall. They've won 3 of their last 4, which includes ranked wins, of course, over Michigan State and Purdue. Wins that they needed to keep their NCAA tournament hopes alive, and they've gotten those wins in convincing fashion. I mean, I, for one, was shocked at how Indiana played Purdue at Assembly Hall a week ago today. It was incredible to watch how lopsided that game was in the second half. Obviously, in the first half, it was a little bit different. The first half was close. It actually kept you on the edge of your seat. Not so much in the second half. Indiana went from trailing by 12 to winning by 15. Which I think tells you everything you needed to know. Purdue, I think, forgot how to play basketball in the second half of that game. You know, it's interesting. On this show, we usually have maybe 1 or 2 games to recap. This week, we can talk about 3, which is a pretty cool thing. Nick Rotocap with you. It's cold again. I walked outside my apartment about 20 minutes ago, and I turned into an icicle by the time I got to my car, so I'm still thawing out. But it's probably a good thing that Indiana baseball is not here right now. They played earlier this week. We'll talk about that and what they're currently up to a little later on. But Indiana basketball is really playing good basketball right now. It's been very impressive to watch. I thought in the first half against Purdue, it was going to be more of the same. Indiana goes into the locker room down 12 against Purdue. The Boo Birds are out at Assembly Hall, which unfortunately had become a common sight, common sound at halftime for Indiana men's basketball. Just fans being discontent with the way the team played in the first half. It just seemed kind of like the norm. And it was, too, when Purdue came to town. It was 37-25 at halftime. Purdue shot over 50% from 3 in the first half of that game, which feels like a lifetime ago, so we won't spend too long on it. But Indiana comes out in the second half, and they were playing like they were on fire, and they could do no wrong, especially defensively, holding Purdue to just 21 points in the second half. Purdue shot just 6 of 20 from the floor and 20% from 3. They were 1 of 5 in the second half. Indiana, on the other hand, wasn't lighting things up from 3 either. They were only 21% for the game. 4 of 19. They did go 3 of 8 in the second half, but just 1 of 11 in the first half, and it didn't really matter because the paint was dominated by Malik Reneau. He is really coming back into form well since his knee injury. I mean, he had a little bit of a slow return, but he's definitely back now. He had 15, 6, and 4 against Purdue. Perfect 7 of 7 shooting, and that is an important stat to note because, again, of what Malik Reneau has done in the last 3 games that he has played. Trey Galloway also had 15. He also had 9 assists. That's the Trey Galloway that we were hoping we would see for the majority of this season. The Trey Galloway that can, I'm not going to say take over a game, but can be a high-level facilitator and a high-level scorer as well. Anthony Leal had 8 points, 8, 5, and 4 for Indiana against Purdue. Oumar Ballo, I mean, Indiana against Purdue had 5 players in double figures. And they beat Purdue comfortably without Mackenzie Mbako even scoring a point. Now, he only played 9 minutes. And I think that is something that fans were kind of begging for against Purdue, was for Mike Woodson to play the Indiana-born players quite a bit, right? Because you look at what Indiana did in West Lafayette about a month ago. The same kind of thing happened where, Trey Galloway played really well. Luke Goody played really well. You look at what happened against Purdue. This time around, Goody had 11, which actually for him was a little underwhelming, but Indiana got the job done. And Purdue, again, just got completely shut down offensively in the second half. It was largely thanks to Indiana just putting overwhelming pressure on the Boilermakers, and Indiana also caught them at a really good time. Purdue had their longest losing streak in 25 years, and Indiana stretched that out to 4 games. Purdue finally snapped that streak, but Indiana caught them at a good time and took advantage and got a great rivalry win. And I think it's really funny that Purdue has been on this stretch where they are as good as they've ever been as a program, and yet they could only go 4-4 against Mike Woodson at Indiana. I think that's really, really funny. And I think it speaks to I don't know what it speaks to. I think it speaks to Mike Woodson's ability as a coach. He's much better than Archie Miller. And to those of you who were saying that Archie Miller and Mike Woodson were the same level of coach, no, not even close. Archie Miller right now at Rhode Island is in the middle of a 3-year stretch where he's been one of the worst coaches in the country in terms of conference winning percentage. I don't have the exact numbers, but we are going to take a look, because between the A-10 and the Big Ten, his last 3 years in each, he's been terrible. Just terrible, awful, no good, and very bad. And not good. At Rhode Island, since he got fired from Indiana, some people are saying that Archie Miller is a better coach than Indiana. Archie Miller has gone 9-22, 12-20, and so far this season, 17-11 at Rhode Island. But there's a catch. He's 6-10 in the Atlantic 10. The year before that, 12-20 overall, 6-12 in the Atlantic 10. The year before that, his first at Rhode Island, 5-13 in the Atlantic 10, and just 9-22 overall. So we have a large enough sample size now to where I think we can comfortably put to rest any sort of comparison between Mike Woodson and Archie Miller. And also, oh, by the way, yeah, Archie never beat Purdue. Not only did his teams never beat Purdue, but they played some of the most mind-numbing basketball against Purdue. I mean, the one that comes to mind for me was the 48-45 game. I believe that was in 2019 at Assembly Hall. Indiana held Purdue to 48 points, and lost. 48-46. It was in February of 2019. Just ridiculous that could happen. They also lost 57-49, and when Bob Knight came back to Assembly Hall, they lost by a lot. They lost 81-69. They lost by 13 points. Those were the kinds of games that Indiana played under Archie Miller. So anybody who thinks that Mike Woodson is not as good of a coach as Archie Miller, hit the showers. Indiana followed up the win over Purdue with a win over Penn State. That was actually much more of a nail-biter than the game against Purdue was once Indiana came out of the locker room in the second half. That game was close wire to wire, which I would say people didn't expect, but I honestly did expect it, and I know I sound like LeBron James. Oh, I knew that this was going to happen way before it did. But Indiana-Penn State was a game that was always going to be close from start to finish because it's the game after the game. It's the one after the rivalry game that, maybe you don't focus the same amount of emotion on, the same amount of energy on. And once again, Indiana went into the locker room trailing, but they came out and they made the plays they needed to make down the stretch to win. And they put themselves in position to be in position. And last night, they did more of the same. We'll talk more about that and more on the other side of this break. I'm Nick Rotacap. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. Before the break, we were talking about how Indiana-Penn State was a little bit closer than it probably should have been. But if you put it in context, was probably expected. And the reason I say that is because it was the game after the game, that one being Indiana's big win over Purdue. And it was on a Wednesday night, and it was a late tip. And again, for whatever reason, I don't know why, but weird things happen on late weeknights in the Big Ten. It just kind of is the way things go. So, Indiana-Penn State, that was a game that the Hoosiers had to have. I mean, it feels like every game is must-win for every team, obviously. But if Indiana lost to Penn State, they were seriously jeopardizing their NCAA tournament hopes and probably would have been in a spot where they needed to go 2-0 on the West Coast, which has been difficult for every team this season because, shocker, traveling across the country is hard. Who could have seen that coming? Oh, everyone. So Indiana had to beat Penn State, and they did. They won by 5. But it wasn't for lack of trying on part of Penn State. They had 6 players in double figures, including Ace Baldwin, who led the way with 22. He was hooping. I won't even lie. 37 minutes played for him. He had 22 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 6 steals. 6 of Penn State's 10 steals for Ace Baldwin, who also made some friends in the IU student section. I don't think they liked him very much, but hey, he was balling straight up. If he would have had a little bit more help, Penn State might have gotten over the top and beaten Indiana, but it was not to be. I'll tell you what, down the stretch in that game, of all people, to really be a difference maker, who would have thought that it was going to be Trey Galloway? Again, he played really well against Purdue, and I've been kind of on the Trey Galloway, hate train at some points this season. But also, he's been playing really well as of late, and it's good to see him, making big time shots, making clutch shots for Indiana, because Indiana is a better team when Trey Galloway plays well. And he has his moments where he does some puzzling things with the basketball. But down the stretch against Penn State, he was a difference maker. You go back to about 6 minutes left. Indiana's down 2. They've been kind of just toe-to-toe with Penn State for most of this game, but they haven't been able to separate themselves. Galloway makes a 3 after having his layup blocked by Nick Kern. He makes the first one, then Indiana goes up 1. Then on the other end, who is it but Ace Baldwin to miss a 3. He went kind of cold late in the game, which was one of the big reasons that Indiana was able to hold on and beat Penn State. And then Galloway gets back down the floor, makes another 3 to put Indiana up 4. And from that point on, Penn State never got closer than 3 points. Indiana made some free throws down the stretch as well. But by and large, it was Trey Galloway making those back-to-back threes that made the difference for Indiana. It was a high-scoring game as well. 161 combined points, which, for a Big Ten game is actually really high-scoring. I mean, you look at the Michigan State-Maryland game that took place just before the Indiana-Penn State game. That game was 58-55. And I was watching that game mostly, I think, from start to finish. It seemed like every time I looked up, somebody was turning the ball over, which I had seen all too many times with Indiana. But Indiana, by and large, took care of the basketball against Penn State. 18 points off turnovers to Penn State's 10. And, again, Indiana didn't shoot well from 3 in the first half, but they turned it on in the second half and held Penn State to 3 of 10 from 3 in the second half. Indiana was 6 of 8. This team is just better. And I know it sounds obvious, but this team is way better when they can shoot from outside. And it was really, really good to watch. Indiana 67% from 3. They only made 60% of their free throws, but it didn't matter. It did not matter. And it was a really, really important win for Indiana. There's a lot of times where you're coming down from a rivalry game and you sort of just come out flat. You think back to Mike Woodson's first win against Purdue, the game where Rob Finney hit the game winner. It wasn't a buzzer beater, but it was a game-winning shot for Rob Finney. Indiana came out, I believe it was against Michigan, after that game and got blown out. Those are the kinds of games where I almost say it's a trap game, just because, it's one of those where you put all your eggs in one basket, and then you kind of forget what comes after. Yeah, Indiana hosted Michigan at Assembly Hall after they beat Purdue on the back of Rob Phinissee's game-winning shot, and Indiana lost by 18 in that game. That was the year after. I want to say it was the year after Michigan made the Final Four. Now, of course, Indiana went on that run in the Big Ten tournament where they came back from down 15 against Michigan, then they upset Illinois, and then Jordan Bohannon knocked them out in the Big Ten semifinal. That was painful, but that's in the past. So, all in all, a win over Penn State that Indiana had to have. I'll tell you what, these teams played each other close this year. Because you think back to the game at the Palestra, that game was also tightly contested, start to finish. And again, Mackenzie Mbako just kind of wasn't a factor, but it didn't really matter for Indiana. The production, I think, is coming from some more unlikely sources than we were expecting. Actually, Mbako did have 13 points for Indiana against Penn State. But just 1 of 3 from three-point range, which is unusual for him. He's kind of more of an outside shooter, I think, but he was not against Penn State. But again, it didn't matter. It did not matter. Anthony Leal, 4 of 5 from the free throw line. Goody was 4 of 4. Ballo was 4 of 6. He also had 12 rebounds and 20 points against Penn State. Just they had no answers for him inside. So, I'll tell you what, ever since Oumar Ballo allegedly went to the upstairs pub the night before the game against Winthrop, it seems like he's been a different player. So I don't want anybody in my face telling me that Ballo doesn't care, because I think he absolutely does. I mean, when this team was down, when this team was in the dumps, Ballo was trying to rally the troops as much as anyone. He was as fired up as anybody else, if not more so. So I'm really glad that Oumar Ballo is on this team. And, whether it's him or whether it's Malik Reneau, Indiana's got somebody in the paint at all times who can do numbers. And last night against Washington, I guess it was afternoon, 6 p.m. tip. That was weird. Last night it was Malik Reneau. He didn't play against Penn State. He apparently had an allergic reaction that forced him to the emergency room sometime between shoot-around and pregame warm-ups. So that's always scary. But he was back in full force. Came off the bench, played 26 minutes against Washington. I believe he made all of his field goals in the first half. And that's important because going back to the UCLA game, I think he had made something like, I want to say it maybe was 20 or 25 straight field goals. So he made his final field goal against UCLA. Then he made all 7 against Purdue. And I think he made the first 7 or 8 against Washington. So that put him at about 16 or 17 straight field goals made in the space of 3 games played. That's the most in at least 25 years. So he was as close to automatic as it got for the last 3 games in the paint for Indiana. Reneau had 22 points to lead all scorers for Indiana off the bench. Off the bench against Washington. Now, Washington's not a good team. But Indiana very easily, and we've seen this so many times, could have gone on the road, especially out west, and just underperformed, fallen flat, and lost a game they should have won. We've seen that movie over and over and over and over. I've been to 2 of those games in person this year. I drove to Nebraska, I drove to Iowa, and I watched both games play out the same way. That did not happen in Seattle last night, largely thanks to Malik Reneau and Luke Goody. Reneau and Goody combined for 40 of Indiana's 78 points. And Reneau was extremely efficient as well. 22 points on 10 made field goals. Also 6 rebounds and 2 assists to go along with it. He's been great. He's been great. And I really think that as soon as Mike Woodson kind of stopped going with the 2 big lineup, it freed up this team offensively. They just look so much more connected. And that's what fans were begging for a long time. Now it's finally happened, and we're seeing Indiana reap the rewards. I also think that this has something to do with the fact that this is it for this era of Indiana basketball, not just for Mike Woodson, but Trey Galloway is going to be gone. Anthony Leal is going to be gone. Those are 2 guys who stuck it out through the firing of Archie Miller. and they are now reaping the rewards. By the way, Anthony Leal in this game, he played 34 minutes, did not score a point, but 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, 3 steals. And how do you quantify that performance, you might ask? Well, you look at his plus minus. The point differential between when he's on the floor and when he's off the floor. And when he was on the floor, he had a plus minus of 26. Indiana outscored Washington by 26 points when Anthony Leal was on the floor. The next highest was Luke Goody, who was plus 23, then Trey Galloway plus 16, and Malik Reneau plus 14. Reneau had 22 points, but Anthony Leal's plus minus was 12 points higher. That tells you the impact that Anthony Leal has when he's on the floor for Indiana. Again, against Washington, a game that Indiana won 78-62. Anthony Leal did not score a point. He attempted 1 shot. He did not go to the free throw line. He scored no points, but he had 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, 3 steals. Oh, and by the way, no turnovers. Indiana took care of the ball very well. 9 turnovers as a team. Anthony Leal had 0. Did not turn the ball over. Plus minus of 26, which means Indiana outscored the Huskies by 26 points when Leal was on the floor. I don't know how it keeps happening. Actually, I do know. But to the untrained eye, to the box score watcher, to someone who is just, I don't know. You don't see the impact of Anthony Leal if you look at the box score, which is why it's important to watch the games. Anthony Leal, I think, is one of the best defensive players in the Big Ten. And I talked about this a while back, I think it was. It seems like every single game that he plays, and Indiana is relatively close in, and they don't even have to win. Every single game that Anthony Leal plays in, with the exception of the Wisconsin game, which was never close, good things happen when he is on the floor. It's groundbreaking analysis, I know, but you measure that through plus minus. He's a defensive nightmare for opposing teams. And the same goes as well for Luke Goody on the offensive end, not on the defensive end. But on the offensive end, Luke Goody was very, very solid last night. 18 points, 4 rebounds, and a steal, and an assist as well for Luke Goody. The leading scorer among the starters, again, Reneau had 22. Goody had 18. And I really, really hope that Goody can get another year of eligibility. I know there's kind of an off chance that he gets a medical red shirt, or a medical waiver, I should say. Does Luke Goody. Because it was one of his seasons at Illinois where, it was 2022-23. He only played 10 games due to an injury. That was the year that Indiana played Illinois. Both teams, I think, were ranked. No, they weren't ranked. Illinois wasn't ranked, but it was a close game at Assembly Hall. Matthew Meyer and Dane Danger, if those names ring a bell. Goody played 10 games as a sophomore. So you would think that maybe he could get a medical waiver and come back. He would be a fifth-year senior if he were to come back. And I really hope that he can get a waiver, because this team, when Luke Goody is on, and it seems like he's really been on in road games, the scoring pace can get pretty hasty pretty quick. So Goody and Reneau, the stories of the game, also Anthony Leal. Again, you can't measure it through points, rebounds, or assists, blocks, or steals. Well, you can measure it through blocks and steals, actually. But Anthony Leal, I think, is one of the best players in the Big Ten and should be first-team all-defense when all is said and done. Now, Ant Wright, who is a former Michigan basketball player, very active on the social media side of Big Ten basketball, is lending some fuel to the fire that maybe Anthony Leal could be Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. I don't think he's going to win it, but he should definitely be in the conversation because he is that good at terrorizing opposing defenses. Oh, and by the way, he'll get you a good rate if you're looking to buy a house. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. It is freezing cold outside. I don't know what the deal is. I sound like an old man. Maybe I do. But I got my hopes up earlier this week when it was nice and warm. It was 60 degrees on Friday. And now it's 21. What the heck? I don't know. It's very annoying and confusing. But it looks like things may actually change for good tomorrow. And then it's going to rain on Tuesday when Indiana baseball comes home from a trip to Florida in which so far they are 2-1. Indiana baseball likes to do this thing now where they get off to a slow start every season. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they just aren't home very much. You know, you're constantly on the road. You're going around the country from Arizona to Cary, North Carolina, back to Bloomington, and then now to DeLand, Florida. They are playing a 4-game series, 2 against Mount St. Mary's, 2 against Stetson. The Hoosiers played a doubleheader on Friday, won both of those games pretty comfortably. Run-ruled Mount St. Mary's 18-5, and then beat Stetson, the hosts, 8-1. The rematch yesterday afternoon against Stetson, the Hatters got the better of the Hoosiers. It was 8-4. That game was not really close after Stetson led wire to wire. So Indiana baseball now is 5-6. They've played 4 games already this week. They took on Xavier on Wednesday afternoon in their home opener and lost 8-4. It was the first time since 2018 that Indiana baseball had lost a home opener. And that was a game that I think put on display a lot of the problems that Indiana has had over the last 2 seasons when it comes to team defense. And as a consequence of that, the pitching staff. But this game against Xavier in particular was not really on the pitching staff because Indiana left so many outs on the board against Xavier. They committed 3 errors. There were more errors out there that were not ultimately in the box score, which again is why you can't really box score watch baseball, because there are so many things that happen beyond the numbers that are important to understand in the context of the game. One thing, though, that's important to note is that Xavier jumped all over Indiana starting pitcher Jackson Yarberry, a pair of home runs in the first inning. And, you know, from there it was kind of one of those where you're thinking, okay, this is going to be a high-scoring game. Indiana had their chances late in the game. Xavier was up 6-4 going into the final couple of innings, and Indiana loaded the bases, I believe, in the 7th. At the very least, they had runners on second and third. Runners on second and third, and kind of unlucky. Jake Hanley strikes out swinging for the second out of the inning, and then Jason Oliver hit, I believe it was a 107-mile-per-hour line out. Oh, no, that was Corbin Dickerson. Sorry. Either way, Indiana had chances in that game. And whereas they could not capitalize, Xavier could. Kind of points to a larger problem that Indiana has had to start this season, where in close games they leave too many runners on base and they commit too many errors. And in particular, the kind of sequence that salted the game away against Xavier, and again, you know, it's 1 game out of 56, but it points to a larger issue. Indiana had a chance. They had runners on first and second with 1 out. And at this point, it was a 6-4 Xavier lead in the 7th inning. Runners on first and second, 1 out. You have the go-ahead run at the plate. The middle of your order is up. Jake Hanley, a freshman who has been swinging it really well this year, he struck out. And Jason Oliver lined out to center field. Okay, you can live with a line out to end the inning because it means you're hitting the ball hard. Get a shutdown inning, you come back in, you keep swinging it well, maybe you can tie the game or take the lead with the home crowd behind you. Top of the 8th rolls around. Again, Xavier's up 6-4 at this point, and the wheels just completely fell off for Indiana defensively. They had already committed 2 errors to this point, but the way this top of the 8th was decided was kind of brutal. It started with a leadoff double, then a bunt single, on what should have been a sacrifice. But the pitcher, Grant Holderfield, who was kind of just left out to dry in this one, could not make the play. So you've got runners on the corners now with nobody out. And then Holderfield induces what should have been a routine double play ball to the second baseman, Jason Oliver. But Oliver threw the ball into left field. The throw was well over the shortstop's head. Cooper Malamazia never had a chance to make the play. So instead of a double play and giving up a run where it would be 7-4, but you would have the bases empty and 2 outs, you've got runners on second and third now with still nobody out. From there, Holderfield hits a batter, sacrifice fly, hit by pitch, and he gets out of the inning. He strands the bases loaded. Okay, so Indiana's down 4, but again, they were swinging it well, and Indiana goes down in order with a pair of strikeouts. And then in the 9th, they get retired in order as well. those are the kinds of sequences that have happened in Indiana baseball far too much in close games, especially over the last 2 years. And, the goal for this team, by their own accounts, by their own admission, is to make a super regional, which is the final step before the College World Series, which is sort of the Elite Eight and Final Four combined into one, if I'm to put it into basketball terms. So let's say super regionals are the Sweet 16. We'll call it the Sweet 16. And in order to make a super, obviously you've got to win your regional. And the best way to do that is to host a regional, which is to be one of the top 16 teams in the country. So far, Indiana has not quite lived up to that. And obviously there is a ton of time left. But you had a lot of opportunities here in this brief non-conference slate on weekends to get some resume-boosting wins. And you got one against Stetson, if Stetson ends up being good. Last year, they made a regional. So did Indiana. But you had two against Xavier, and you couldn't capitalize on either one. I understand, not winning in Arizona because it's far away from home, yada, yada, yada. But that was also a game Indiana had a chance to win. They tied it in the 9th on a 3-run homer from Jason Oliver. Got to the 10th and immediately surrendered the lead, which is another problem, that Indiana just can't hold a lead in a close game where, their offense gets momentum and the pitching staff gives it right back, or the defense gives it right back because they leave outs on the board. You've got to close games like that. And sure, Indiana did it against Northwestern, but let's be honest, Northwestern baseball is not good. They were the worst team in the Big Ten last year, and it wasn't even close. I think they won 4 Big Ten games out of 24. I could be wrong, so I'm going to check myself, but they were historically bad last season. Northwestern so far 5-4 this year on the diamond. Last year they were 18-34, and yeah, they won 4 Big Ten games, 4 out of 24 Big Ten games. They were the worst team in the conference. You beat them by 1 run on a neutral site in a game that doesn't count in the Big Ten standings. Okay, so Indiana now is 5-6. They play Mount St. Mary's here in about an hour and a half. They played 11, which, I know they're not going to miss these 4-game series. This is the final 4-game series of the weekend for Indiana. Of the year, I should say. The final 4-game series of the year. Thankfully, because most teams do not have enough pitching to play 4 games in a weekend. Indiana certainly does not. But somehow, they've got to find a way against Mount St. Mary's this weekend. This afternoon. This morning. Good Lord. This morning. Mount St. Mary's is 6-3. They will take on Indiana in DeLand, Florida. Indiana won the first game between these two teams 18-5. So, you go 3-1 on the weekend. You'll be back to 500 coming home and getting ready for the start of Big Ten play for Indiana. A 30-game Big Ten slate, which is 2 weekends more worth of games than were played in the past. And I think Indiana has a chance to really make some waves in the conference this year because they were one of the 3 Big Ten title favorites on the diamond, along with Oregon and Nebraska. Now, Oregon is a top 15 program in the country, easily. They're the odds-on favorite. Nebraska right behind them. Indiana doesn't play either one this year. They do not play Oregon. They do not play Nebraska in the regular season. That is big for the Hoosiers. They've got series opening up against Penn State and Happy Valley. The first home conference series, which is Indiana's first home weekend series, is against Ohio State in 2 weeks. Then UCLA, USC, Michigan State, Illinois, which is always close, Maryland, which is always close, Iowa, and Purdue. That's a very favorable Big Ten schedule for Indiana baseball, so they've still got time. You get out of DeLand at 500, at 6-6. You come home. You might play Northern Kentucky on Tuesday, but I expect that game to get rained out, which is annoying. But it happens. It happens. You can make some noise in the Big Ten Conference for Indiana. And the thing about them is that they always seem to get better as the season goes along. And once they get better, they seem to be pretty consistent. So that's something to keep an eye out. Again, Indiana does not play a home game on a weekend until March 14th, which is very strange. You're listening to IE Sports Sunday. Back here on IE Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. First Sunday in March. That means one thing and one thing only. We're getting closer and closer to going dancing. We're going to have a bracket here in a couple of weeks, and that is a beautiful thing. 2 games left in the regular season for Indiana men's basketball. Oregon on Tuesday night in Eugene. Oregon is a team that got off to a hot start and then kind of got mired in the middle of the Big Ten. Once conference play began, the Hoosiers will take on the Ducks on Tuesday at 9 and then return home for Senior Day. That is Saturday at 3:45 p.m. on CBS. And then, 2 weeks from today is the selection show. That is going to be fun. Indiana's going to be in, hopefully. I think they are, I said this earlier, they're in position to be in position. Barring a collapse, knock on wood, if you're that sort of person. Barring a collapse, they're going to be in. I'm not talking going to the first 4 in Dayton like they did 3 years ago. I'm talking being in the dance, in the field of 64. I think that is going to happen. Even if they, if they go one and done in the Big Ten tournament, we might have to have a discussion. I don't know that they're going one and done in the Big Ten tournament. I hope that the Indianapolis crowd is IU friendly and that it gets behind them. Who knows? Maybe they even make a run because the way they're playing right now, I think they could beat just about anybody, especially if Anthony Leal is on the floor. So that's something to keep an eye on. There is definitely a scenario, though, where when Indiana hosts Ohio State, that game is sort of a win and in because Ohio State and Indiana are both on the bubble. And it's kind of odd because Indiana went to Columbus and beat Ohio State, in part thanks to Anthony Leal. But both of those teams are pretty much right on the bubble. Indiana got a lot of help from teams around the country yesterday, other bubble teams, with the exception of Xavier, who totally just killed Creighton. But a lot of other bubble teams lost yesterday, and that was big for Indiana as well. So you take care of business against either Oregon or Ohio State, but hopefully against Ohio State because it's a home game. You're in the big dance, I think. So I am excited to fill out my bracket here in about 2 weeks. I'm excited to pretend to pay attention in class while watching college basketball on that first Thursday. And I don't have class on Friday. But if you do have class on Friday, you're probably going to be watching college basketball. And if you say otherwise, you are lying not just to me, but to yourself. You're listening to IE Sports Sunday. Back here on IE Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. On a sunny but cold Sunday morning, it's March though, so it's okay. I've come to the conclusion that if Indiana basketball wins their final 2 games, then the Big Ten basketball tournament does not matter because they will be in the big dance no matter what. You can try to change my mind on this if you want, but I'm not going to buy it. I will put my head in the sand, and I will not listen because I think that if Indiana beats Oregon and Ohio State, then they will be in the NCAA tournament for the 3rd time in 4 years under Mike Woodson. That is an impressive turnaround on its own. But I think it would be even more impressive if somehow Indiana could maybe go on a little run in March. And there are so many bracket projections out there, it's impossible. It is impossible to predict where the Hoosiers will actually end up. In terms of, their matchup, their seeding, whatever. It's impossible to predict it. But all I'm saying is Indiana seems to be peaking around the right time. Now, there's a lot of time between now and the first weekend of the tournament. I realize that. But Indiana seems to be hitting their stride at the right time. Playing for their head coach, playing for each other. And who knows, man? I don't know. I mean, you look at what NC State did last year. NC State had no business making the Final Four, but they did. That's all I'm going to say. It's possible. You get in, you have a chance. The same goes for the other 63 teams as well. But if you get in, you have a chance. So Indiana will take on Oregon Tuesday night at 9 in Eugene. Oregon is an interesting team because they had a good start to the year. And then conference play hit, and they just kind of fell on their face, I think is a good way to put it. They kind of fell flat. And now they've kind of faded into the middle. I mean, they're 10-7 in the Big Ten, 19-9 overall. So actually pretty similar to Indiana. That's their women's team. I apologize. That is not their men's team. I was thinking that record looks a little too good for Oregon men's basketball. Well, they're okay. They're 10-8 in the Big Ten, 21-8 overall. So they're a game ahead of Indiana in conference play. And they are actually on a little bit of a heater right now. They have won 5 games in a row, dating back to February 11th when they beat Northwestern. But prior to that, they went on a massive skid where they lost 4 or 5 in a row. So they're streaky. Oregon is very streaky. And I am interested to see how that game plays out. Obviously, Oregon is much better than Washington. Usually for these teams that go to the West Coast, Indiana is the last one to do it. Usually for these teams, the first game is worse because you're still kind of getting adjusted. Second game, you're adjusted. Your body is calibrated, and I don't think the time change really impacts you as much. So I would expect Indiana to give Oregon a fight, if nothing else. Ideally, you win. And I think Indiana right now, again, I think Indiana could beat anybody right now. With how this team is clicking, I would put them up against anybody in the Big Ten. But you look at Oregon, you look at the way they stack up against Indiana. Oregon is a team that is led by Jackson Shelstad and Nate Biddle. Jackson Shelstad is one of the better guards in the conference. He is averaging 13 points per game. He shoots 40% from 3. I would almost compare him to maybe a Luke Goody type in terms of his raw numbers. High efficiency shooter, great at the free throw line. Doesn't get to the line a lot, but when he does, he makes it count. He's a good facilitator as well, leads the team in assists. So you've got to watch out for Jackson Shelstad. I'd say he's their go-to when the game is on the line. Inside, it's Nate Biddle. Biddle also averaging 13 a game to go along with 7.1 rebounds per game to lead the Ducks. So that's really kind of their two-headed monster, Biddle and Shelstad. You also got guys like TJ Bamba, Keyshawn Bartholomew as well, both of them averaging double figures for the Ducks as well. So the tail of the tape on Oregon, it seems like they play a lot of close games. And, just like Indiana had a couple resume-boosting wins over ranked teams, Oregon got one over Wisconsin in overtime. That was a really impressive game. It was on the road in Madison. It was either last week or 2 weeks ago. They were down by double digits. They were down by something like 15, and they came back and won in overtime on the road at the Kohl Center, which, as Indiana knows, is very tough to win at. So that was an impressive win for Oregon. Something to note, though, as far as Oregon's per-game numbers are concerned, they're kind of like Purdue in a way. They take advantage of turnovers quite a bit. As far as forcing turnovers and scoring off those turnovers, they average about 4 more points off turnovers than their opponents per game. They force more turnovers than they give up. They're smarter with the basketball than their opponents generally on a per-game basis. So that is something to keep an eye on Tuesday night. Obviously, you turn the ball over, you don't give yourself the best chance of winning. And that is what Indiana was able to limit in the second go-around against Purdue. Because you remember the first game, Indiana turned the ball over 20 times. Game 2, they began the second half on a 28-3 run. So that tells you that when Indiana cleans things up, and when they don't turn the ball over, which again is not exactly rocket science, but it's something to keep in mind. Take care of the ball, limit the possessions of your opponents, and you give yourselves a much better chance to win. Oregon, decent three-point shooting team, top half of the Big Ten. Indiana is 15th in the Big Ten in three-point shooting, 32.4%. They are tied with Nebraska. Nebraska, who had a tough loss against Minnesota at home yesterday. I think the Huskers are pretty much eliminated now from NCAA tournament contention. If they're not, they're very close. You just can't lose to Minnesota at home. Minnesota's not a good team. So, yikes for the Huskers. And again, it makes their win over Indiana even more puzzling. Just one of those games that Indiana, I think, would like to have back. You go on the road, you get blown out, you come home, people get frustrated. It just happens too much. It happened too much. Past tense. We're looking forward. We are looking forward. So again, Tuesday night at 9, Indiana takes on the Ducks, and then they come home for Senior Day against Ohio State. That game is sold out, which is a good thing. I believe it'll be a whiteout. So hopefully Indiana doesn't do something dumb like wear black jerseys for a whiteout. Since they wore the black jerseys last night against Washington, by the way, those jerseys look good. And I will not hear any arguments on this. The black script jerseys made their debut for the men's team last night. The women wore them back, I think, in the Bahamas in November. The men just kind of broke them out of nowhere. Honestly, I say wear them until you lose because they played really well. They shut down any hopes that Washington had of an upset win last night. Wear them until you lose. Look good, play good. That's what I say. I like the black jerseys. I cannot wait for Adidas to never sell them, because Adidas does not know how to market any Indiana products. I don't even think they like that Indiana exists, to be honest with you. You can't buy an Indiana soccer jersey, which makes no sense because Indiana soccer has won 8 national titles. So why can't I buy an Indiana soccer jersey? I don't know. So if you like the way the black jerseys look, then don't get your hopes up because Adidas will probably never sell them, just like they never sell anything cool because Adidas is dumb and bad, and Indiana should have switched to Nike, but they didn't. Instead, they signed a long-term extension with Adidas, and that is just very silly. Very silly. Speaking of silly, Purdue women's basketball is the last team on Indiana women's basketball schedule today. That game at 2 o'clock in West Lafayette. You can find it on Peacock. And, Indiana women's basketball had another chance to secure a resume-boosting win against Maryland at home on senior night on Thursday. They lost that game by 14. Maryland's always a good team. They always play Indiana tough, at least in recent memory, as far as I can remember. But that was a game that Maryland really just kind of took over. In the even-numbered quarters, they outscored Indiana by 10 in the second quarter and by 7 in the fourth quarter. By and large, other than that, it was pretty even. So if you take away the quarters where Indiana played poorly, they wouldn't have won. Shocker. But Cheyenne Sellers, who has been great for the last handful of years, Cheyenne Sellers had 25 points on 50% shooting to lead all Maryland players. Kayleen Smeichel had 16 and 6 for the Terps. Always a threat in the Big Ten. You remember last year in the conference tournament, they took down number 1 seed Ohio State. The Big Ten tournament will start on Wednesday. Hopefully Indiana is not playing until Thursday or Friday. I believe now they will be on somewhere in the 8-9 seed range, which would mean they play on Thursday. They had to beat Maryland to have a shot at the double bye. They did not beat Maryland, so I believe Indiana will be either an 8 seed or a 9 seed in the Big Ten women's basketball tournament when it gets underway on Wednesday in Indianapolis. That will conclude on Sunday, March 9th, a week from today, in the Circle City, which, by the way, is a great place to be. The IHSAA girls basketball state championships, I think, were yesterday, and I got to go my senior year when our boys team made the state championship and won it. Got to see Matt Painter and Tom Izzo sitting next to each other courtside, both watching Xavier Booker. That was pretty cool to see. So if you have a chance to go to Gainbridge Fieldhouse for any reason at all, and you haven't been, dude, you're missing out. You got to go. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you on this Sunday morning. Indiana Swim and Dive might be the greatest dynasty that no one's talking about right now, at least in the realm of IU sports. The men won their 4th consecutive Big Ten championship last night in Columbus, and it wasn't even close. It was not even close. I was actually in Minneapolis. I apologize. The women were in Columbus. The men were in Minneapolis, taking care of business as usual for them. There is nothing surprising about them winning a Big Ten title at all at this point. They're so dominant year in and year out. It's incredibly impressive. The men have won 7 of the last 9 Big Ten titles, and 8 now under the tutelage of head swimming coach Ray Lewis. I covered swim and dive my freshman season. Coach Lewis was always very gracious to me. You know, swim and dive does not get a lot of media coverage. So Coach Lewis was very accommodating as I learned the ropes of beat reporting. Got to cover that program a couple years back. They were great. Great to watch, too. These guys are phenomenal athletes. And they put it on display again in Minneapolis. They won the Big Ten title by over 400 points over second place Michigan and third place Ohio State. The gap between Indiana and Michigan in first and second place was the same as the gap between Indiana and Northwestern. Between Michigan and Northwestern, I apologize. The gap between first and second was the same as the gap between second and seventh place. That is absurd. First team All Big Ten honors, 50% of the athletes on that list are from Indiana. It's ridiculous. I think it was the 200-meter breaststroke final. The top 5 finishers were all from Indiana. It's stupid. You look at it, and it's just stupid how dominant this team is. Owen McDonald in the 200 backstroke set a Big Ten record. Big Ten records all over the place. Program records all over the place. The dominance, it's hard to put it into words. It really is. It just seems like every single year, Indiana Swim and Dive is one of the best programs in the country. And, of course, the best program in the conference. It's 4 straight Big Ten titles for Indiana Swim and Dive. Just phenomenal stuff from them. A pair of swimmers on the all-freshman team as well. So the future is bright. But, again, half the athletes on the first team, all-conference team, from Indiana. More than every other school combined. It's ridiculous. And you have people accusing them of cheating. And if people are accusing you of cheating, then you know you're doing something right. That is the ultimate compliment. It doesn't matter the sport, doesn't matter the venue, it doesn't even have to be sports. But if people accuse you of cheating, then you're probably doing something right. The largest margin of victory in Big Ten history, 448 points. 11 individual titles, 26 medals, 3 Big Ten conference records. It's incredible, and it gets more incredible the more you look at it. So huge congrats to Indiana Swim and Dive as they look for a national title, the NCAA championships. The diving championships get underway in Columbus next Monday. The swim championships get underway in Washington State, just outside Seattle, on March 26th. So after spring break, they'll have some time to prepare for their trip out west, looking to be the last team standing. Just incredible stuff for one of the best athletic programs at this university. Not just at this university, but in the country, in my opinion. They are fantastic. So, again, as we look towards March Madness at this point, I'm not going to say in the season, I guess, as we wind down towards Selection Sunday, it'll be in 2 weeks, of course. I do think that if Indiana, there are a couple different ways that Indiana, I think, can guarantee a spot. I would say one is obviously just to win both games to close the regular season. The other is to win one game to close the regular season and then win a game in the Big Ten tournament. All you got to win is one, if it gets to that point. So I would expect them to, I'm not going to say lose at Oregon, play Oregon close. I think beat Ohio State at home. I think that, especially with it being Mike Woodson's last game at Assembly Hall, the last game for a lot of these guys, not just Woodson. But obviously Anthony Leal, Luke Goody, Trey Galloway. I hope Luke Goody gets a waiver. But assuming he doesn't, Luke Goody, Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, Umar Ballo, Langdon Hatton, Dallas James. I was wishing that at some point we would get Dallas James minutes. It's not going to happen. But I wish. It would be funny. It would be awesome, actually. As of right now, Indiana sitting around the edge of a 9 seed, maybe a high 10 seed, around the same neighborhood as, of all teams, Gonzaga and Baylor. Gonzaga is 23-8. You remember a couple months back, it seemed like they were dead in the water. They were getting, upset in conference games left and right, and that allowed St. Mary's to lock up the West Coast Conference title. St. Mary's a team that Indiana knows all too well in the NCAA tournament. But Indiana and Gonzaga, Baylor, Georgia, Xavier, all in that kind of 9 to 10 range. Just behind UConn and Illinois, two teams that have massively underwhelmed this season relative to expectations. Now, Illinois had some help. The Illini sort of just everybody got sick pretty much at one point or another, and that really hurt them. Obviously, when you've got guys who are just falling ill, it's impossible to play your best. But Indiana, fortunately, has been able to avoid that, at least so far. And as the weather warms up, I would hope that it remains that way. So Indiana looking at a 9 or a 10 seed. I'd say unless you lose both, and then you lose one in the Big Ten tournament, you go one and done in the Big Ten tournament, you're probably okay as far as a play-in is concerned. I think you're out of that range at this point. So being a 9 or a 10 is probably the most likely outcome. And again, once you get in, anything can happen. 8-9 games can create chaos. Usually an 8 seed, 9 seed might play a 1 seed pretty close. That's all I'm saying. It's all I'm saying is you need a shot. You just need a shot. Projected number 1 seed, of course, number 1 overall is Auburn. I don't think that's any shock to anybody. Auburn is a wagon, a total wagon, a freight train rolling down a hill at a rapid rate of knots. And I don't know. I don't know that they're going to make the Final Four. And I know that sounds kind of crazy because it's Auburn and Duke, I believe, that both have minus odds to make the Final Four, which is ridiculous. I would trust Duke before I would trust Auburn, to be honest with you. Because Duke, the SEC is a massive gauntlet, and Auburn has pretty much blasted everybody they've played. I don't know. My gut just says Duke in the Final Four over Auburn. How many years do you have multiple 1 seeds in the Final Four? The answer is not a lot. So I don't know. Just don't be surprised. I think with the way Duke dominated Illinois, that just made a statement to me. It was, I believe, the worst loss in Illinois program history. So right now the projected 1 seeds, Auburn and Duke, and then Houston and Alabama. Houston, who's their head coach? Kelvin Sampson, that's right. Is he connected to IU at all? I don't know. Being a little sarcastic here, of course. But yeah, well documented at this point. Florida, big win last night. Tennessee, Michigan State, and Michigan, the 2 seeds. Florida, Tennessee, Michigan State, and Michigan. That win that Indiana got over Michigan State looking better and better by the day. But I'll tell you what, we've got a big day ahead of us in Big Ten basketball. Just a couple of games on this Sunday, but they're big. They are huge games, not just big. A top 15 matchup, Michigan State and Wisconsin at 1:30. That is, of course it's going to be fun. I don't have to sell that game. It's in East Lansing at the Breslin Center. Wisconsin looking to pull off the upset and sort of avenge that loss that they had to Oregon. This game might actually decide the Big Ten. No, well, okay. Because you've got Michigan and then Michigan State at the top. Wisconsin in third. So Wisconsin beats Michigan State. Things might get a little chaotic there. But yeah, that's going to be fun on CBS. Michigan State and Wisconsin, and then following that, Michigan hosts Illinois as the Illini look to get something back before the conference tournament and postseason play begin. Northwestern UCLA on Monday night, and then, of course, Indiana and Oregon on Tuesday night. But Michigan State, Wisconsin is going to be a fun one. I'll tell you what, winning at the Breslin Center ain't for everybody. Indiana got it done. Can Wisconsin? We'll find out at 1:30 on CBS. As far as IU sports in action today, it's a pretty quiet day. The women play Purdue. That's at 2 o'clock on Peacock. Much like the women were on Peacock, the men were last night. The women will be today. Purdue women's basketball is historically awful. I do not expect that game to be close. Even though it is a rivalry game, Purdue women's basketball is not good. So I'd expect Indiana to close the regular season on a high note, go into the conference tournament, and we'll see what happens. They are also safely in the dance, I think. They should be okay. A couple wins in the conference tournament would not hurt them, though. Baseball plays at 11 against Mount St. Mary's. That'll be on the IU Sports Radio Network. No TV broadcast for any of the games in Stetson this weekend, which is disappointing. Again, with college baseball being a growing sport, you would think making it accessible to viewers would be a good way to grow it. But there are tournaments, there are weekends which are either not broadcast or put behind a paywall. It's just very annoying, and I think that it needs to change. We'll talk more on the other side of this break. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Becker and IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. And with Indiana basketball's win over Washington last night, the Hoosiers are now officially in the Big Ten tournament, which is not a guarantee. Was not a guarantee just a couple of weeks ago. But the Hoosiers are now officially going to be in Indianapolis one way or another. The bottom three teams in the Big Ten, Indiana played two of them this week and beat both of them. Penn State and Washington down in the basement. Iowa and USC are fighting to stay out of 16th place. USC stuck there right now. Iowa just ahead by half a game over the Trojans. Indiana is pretty much dead in the middle, I think. You look at Indiana, currently 9th in the conference standings, and you look right below them, and it's Ohio State. So again, who's above them? It's Oregon. These last two games are very meaningful. Very, very meaningful for the Hoosiers. They will be in Indianapolis, but you have to imagine if they can beat either Oregon or Ohio State, they will be in the big dance. If they can beat both, they are going to be in. That is where they currently sit. The Hoosiers, again, I think are peaking at the right time as far as playing their best basketball, playing connected, playing as a unit, limiting the self-inflicted mistakes, having guys step up and make plays when they need to. I think we've seen that happen in spades, really, over the last handful of games. Against Michigan State, it was Malik Reneau taking things over. Against Purdue, it was really a combination of guys. The entire team on defense, first of all. And then Penn State, Trey Galloway, and yet again, Oumar Ballo as well. And that one with the absence of Malik Reneau. We knew Ballo was going to have a big game, and he came through. And then last night against Washington, it was Malik Reneau coming off the bench. And I can't help but wonder if, part of the reason that Indiana has surged since Mike Woodson announced that he was stepping down at the end of the season, I can't help but wonder if part of that is because, since Woodson knows he's not coming back, where there's certain, again, this is me just kind of spitballing here, where there's certain promises that were made to players which have been thrown out the window. For example, promising player X that he would start every game, or promising player Y a certain number of minutes played per game. I just can't help but wonder if maybe that's part of the reason, like with those things being thrown out the window, that's part of the reason that Indiana has really surged, because it was very clear very early on in the season that the two big lineup with Oumar Ballo and Malik Reneau on the floor at the same time would not work. It has never worked for Mike Woodson at Indiana. It didn't work last year. It didn't work this year. But for some reason, even though as the numbers continued to come out, as the sample size continued to get larger and larger, it was more and more clear that it didn't work. But for some reason, they stuck with it. And then Mike Woodson, announces his retirement, and they stopped going with the two big lineup. They stopped a little bit before that, but they would go back to it every now and then. But ever since the retirement announcement, it's been a one big lineup. Luke Goody or Anthony Leal or both have been inserted into the starting lineup because you remember the way Goody played at Ohio State. He didn't start the next game, which made absolutely no sense. But now Indiana's sticking with this one big lineup pretty much every game. And, Miles Rice and Malik Reneau are coming off the bench. By the way, Miles Rice actually had a pretty good game last night. He had been slumping. He'd been quiet offensively lately. I'd been a very outspoken critic of Miles Rice because at some points during games, especially late in games, his decision-making was questionable at best. But Rice was efficient last night in Washington. Maybe he just needed to be back in Washington to play at his best. 10 points, 5 rebounds on 2 of 3 3-point shooting. 26 minutes off the bench for him. Maybe he just needed to be back terrorizing the Huskies because Washington fans know him all too well after what he did at Washington State last year. Pac-12 all-freshman team, of course. Freshman of the year in the Pac-12, more than just all-freshman team. So maybe he just needed a little homecoming. Maybe he has a big game on Tuesday night against Oregon. But those guys coming off the bench, Reneau and Rice, make this team better. So I can't help but wonder if maybe with Woodson retiring, he knows he's not coming back, so maybe he doesn't have to hold up his end of the I'm going to promise you X amount of starts per season or X amount of minutes per game, that sort of thing. Maybe he doesn't have to hold up to those promises anymore, and it gives him some freedom. It gives Indiana a different look offensively. Putting Anthony Leal in the starting lineup. Leal has started more games this season than he did in his entire career leading up to this season. And Indiana is a much better team defensively for that. So I think it's very interesting to note the way things have trended. They're trending in the right direction. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you on this first Sunday in March. February was a very short month, and I know it's the shortest month of the year, but it felt like it was about, half as long as January. January took about 7 years to get through. Maybe it's because Indiana basketball is winning. Maybe time flies when you're having fun. That might be what it is. I don't know. I'm not a scientist. But what I do know is that it is more fun when Indiana basketball is winning. College basketball as a whole, I think, is better when Indiana basketball is winning. So many bubble teams losing yesterday, plus Indiana winning. Really, it was the best possible outcome for the Hoosiers. Question is, can they keep the momentum? We'll find out on Tuesday night. Oregon is a much better team than Washington is, but Indiana will also have had plenty more time to adjust to life out west when they go to Eugene and Matthew Knight Arena to take on the Ducks, who will probably wear one of their 76 different alternate uniforms. I'm trying to figure out between Oregon and Iowa State which team hates their traditional uniform look more. I think for football, actually, I don't know. For football, it's probably Oregon, because Oregon, I don't think, wears the same uniform twice during football season. For basketball, it's probably Iowa State, because Iowa State loves wearing alternate uniforms in basketball, especially black alternates. So maybe Indiana, I didn't make that connection. Iowa State likes wearing black alternate uniforms for basketball. Indiana wore black alternates last night. Who's one of the coaches on the Indiana basketball hot board? Iowa State's TJ Otzelberger. Very interesting. Maybe it's a recruiting pitch. Maybe Scott Dolson broke those alternates out for the men and said, hey, TJ, you want to wear black alternates? We can do that too. We know you restructured your contract with Iowa State, but look, we have black alternate jerseys, and we have more NIL than they do in Ames. To be fair, though, Iowa State did give us Tyrese Halliburton, so maybe we've already taken too much from them. I don't know. I guess Iowa State didn't give us Tyrese Halliburton. They gave Sacramento Tyrese Halliburton, and then Sacramento gave us Tyrese Halliburton. We're arguing semantics at this point. But maybe the black uniforms were a recruiting pitch for TJ Otzelberger to come over from Iowa State and coach the Indiana Hoosiers. I'll tell you what, though. I am already sick of this coaching search. I've been sick of this coaching search for a while. Indiana did hire a search firm the same one that they hired to ultimately land on Curt Cignetti. So I trust that Indiana's going to get it right. And that maybe, just maybe, the Hoosiers can, one day, sooner rather than later, return to glory. Return to the peak of college basketball. Not just making NCAA tournaments, maybe winning a game in the first round, maybe making the Big Ten semifinal. No. Fighting for Big Ten championships and national championships. That is what Indiana basketball should be. And it's interesting because I've got a lot of family on both sides, on one side, on my father's side, a lot of IU fans, all from the state of Indiana, that kind of thing. And one of my uncles, he is a Purdue fan, a pretty staunch Purdue fan, even though he went to IU. And for the longest time, I couldn't figure out why. I could not figure out why. Very interesting. But, we were talking about the legacy of Bob Knight. Very, very complicated legacy. And I will admit, it's hard for people as young as me, who were not alive when Bob Knight was coaching at Indiana. He was fired 2 or 3 years before I was born, to put that into perspective. I have no recollection of Bob Knight as a coach. All I know are stories. All I know are, anecdotes and the history as told by people who came before me. And so it was kind of hard to grasp the way that the program looked under Bob Knight and the way that the way the program was. It was very interesting. All I will say is that I finally got around to watching the ESPN 30 for 30 on Bob Knight, the last days of Knight. It came out in 2018, so I'm a little late to the party. I realized that, but finally got an ESPN Plus subscription, so I figured why not? It's there. Very interesting. Very interesting for sure. I think a lot of people maybe viewed it as a hit piece on Bob Knight, and I can understand where they're coming from. But at the same time, ESPN, in making that documentary, reached out to Knight multiple times, seeing if he wanted to talk, and he never did. Which, he didn't have to, but by not giving your side of the story when you're offered to, I think you kind of waive the right to, not necessarily a fair trial, but the right to, tell your side of the story because you had an opportunity to and you didn't. And it's very interesting watching the last days of Knight, seeing how everything unfolded that ultimately led to his firing, because I had heard the stories of, for example, the student outside Assembly Hall who said, "Hey, what's up, Knight?" And then that led to an altercation when Indiana had already implemented the zero tolerance policy. Obviously, I knew the story about Neil Reed, but I didn't know just how bad things were on campus as far as students protesting, burning Miles Brand in effigy, threatening people who criticized Knight, those sorts of things. And I'm looking at where this is all taking place and thinking, wow, I walk by these places every day. And I had no idea that it was that bad. As far as, the exit of Bob Knight, obviously I knew that he delivered that speech in Dunn Meadow, and then kind of fell off the face of the earth as far as IU is concerned for a while. It was a big thing when he and his wife bought a house in Bloomington in 2019, and then he came back to Assembly Hall in February of 2020, right before COVID hit. He came back to Assembly Hall, and then I think he was spotted at an IU baseball game a year later. But the last days of Knight really kind of, I think, opened my eyes to the craziness that kind of embodied, or that I'm trying to find the right words, the craziness that headlined Bob Knight's last days at IU. So that was very eye-opening for me. Obviously, I wasn't around when he was coaching, but that was a little bit more eye-opening, and the work that went into that documentary was incredible. And it's kind of crazy to think about now because a lot of the key players involved in, the complicated legacy of Bob Knight, a lot of those people are gone now. And it's kind of nuts to think about it because all this stuff happens. Yet if you were to, just step on to campus today and in a vacuum, you would have no idea. You would have no idea. So very, very interesting stuff there. And I bring that up because as the Mike Woodson era draws to a close, he's the last link to Bob Knight as far as, IU coaches go. Obviously, Quinn Buckner being a trustee, right? That's different. But Woodson as a coach, having played under Bob Knight, one of the last people connected to the program still to have direct memory of what he was like as a coach. One of the greatest coaches, probably the greatest college coach ever in the eyes of many, if not certainly top 3 all time, but a complicated legacy off the court, well beyond what, I can certainly grapple with. But that's going to do it for us on IU Sports Sunday. Again, the IU women take on Purdue at 2 o'clock at Mackey Arena. Should be able to close the regular season on a high note for Terry Morin's team as they look to make a run in the postseason. The men in Eugene, they'll take on Oregon on Tuesday night.